Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. Where am I? Well, I'm in London. Traveled across the pond to London. Here I am. It is beautiful here. I am on Upper Regency Street right now, and it's just fantastic. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, oh, you must be in Epcot, you would be wrong, because I am actually in, okay, it's Epcot, but it's awesome, okay? Speaking of awesome, we got a great show coming your way. I'm super excited about this show. I've been cooking this idea up in my head, which is a scary place, for some time, but it is going to yield an informative and entertaining video, at least I hope, for you. So we're going back to our roots. Record-ology means record archaeology, which means the discovery, the hunt, the thrill of it all, the discovery, the knowledge, the learning, the CSI work, and that's what we're going to do today, guys. I'm going to teach you how to become a record detective. You're not going to want to miss this. So we have talked at length about shopping for records, where to find records, where to get good deals on records, how to clean them when you get home, how to store them, all that good stuff, extensively how to play them. But we've really never gone into the true detective CSI aspect of record collecting until today. And we've talked about looking at the store. I mean, that's been like CSI detective work. But even once you buy the record, there is detective work to do. So in order to demonstrate this, I am going to use some records from my Patsy Cline collection because it is one of the most extensive collections that I have. The other one being Glenn Miller, which supersedes this fairly considerably. But anyway, this is a great example because I have a lot of duplicates and there's different reasons to own different versions. And there are different versions. So that's something that I wanted to talk to you about today. How to decide, really find out all there is to know about your record and how to search for certain records. Because many people that grew up with CDs and downloads especially and tapes are used to seeing one version of an album and it just is what it is. It's rarer for CDs and tapes and extremely rare for downloads. In fact, I think it's nil for downloads for there to be different versions. Well, I take that back because sometimes they'll have like an extended version albums on Spotify or Apple Music, but you get what I'm saying. But with vinyl records, it was fairly common for there to be very different versions and collectors could go and search for those versions. So to start our discussion here and our journey, I've got a lot of cool things to look at, and then we are going to listen to a record at the end on a really special record player, and I've got a little bit of gossip. I've got a little bit of inside baseball to share with you, so stay tuned to the end for that. So the number one thing that you can see when you're shopping for a record is the cover, obviously. So if there are different cover versions, which happens, that's something to look for. So you may want an older album version because of the cover, or that may be one of the key aspects. So that's the easiest thing. You can just look at it and say, okay, this is a different cover. These two are the same album and the same album cover, pretty much. I mean, we can tell that this one looks a lot whiter, and I presume this one was, a lot wider at the beginning. But what's really fun about this is there's all sorts of things that you can look for. There's all sorts of details. So this one, for example, this is Decca Records, A Portrait of Patsy Cline. It's one of the posthumous albums that was released by her. And as you can see, this is a Decca Records label. And then if you look at this one of the things we notice right off the bat is this says MCA. So that tells us something. That helps us with dating this pressing. This not necessarily when the album was released, but when these records were made. Because this record, I think, came out 64, 65 after she passed away. But MCA Records, what does that have to do with Decca? Well, that helps tell the story. So you can do a little, Google search or Wikipedia search and find out that Decca became MCA Records right about 1972, I think it was. So now we know that this is earlier than 72 and this one is newer than 72, which would explain, why it looks so much better quality, and that's a cool thing. There may be other differences too. So for instance, right here, this says printed in the USA right here, whereas this one doesn't. These little details really get you looking at the details. The next logical thing is, well, what does the back look like? Is the back the same? So there's the back of the older one, and here's the back of the newer one. So this, again, helps us tell the story of this particular record. This one just has MCA Records down here, and there's no date, but that's okay. We can find out another way. I'll show you. It's got the track listing laid out differently. It doesn't have the little teaser about the other albums or the blurb about high fidelity Decca records. By the way, these are all going to be MCA Decca records, I think exclusively, just because that's what Patsy Cline was released on. You can get into the weeds on this stuff on any record label, and everyone has its idiosyncrasies. I'm just more familiar with Decca because of this collection, and then RCA Victor because of the Glenn Miller stuff. But that's a different show for a different day. Now the next thing is this little number up in the corner. It's also on the front, but this says DL4508. So if we look at this one, it doesn't say that, and we know this is an MCA version, which is what Decca became, but it's renumbered. So MCA 224. That alone tells us that the music on this was probably mastered separately from the music on this, or at least cut and pressed separately. This is an easy example, but I thought it would be a good place to start. So those are a couple of very basic ways to get started, just taking a moment to consume the album art. All right, moving on. And by the way, this is really where, if you love vinyl and you love record collecting, this is part of that tactile, slow, involved aspect, which I love so very much. Okay, if you remember last year, my wife bought me this record, which is rare. It's worth anywhere from, it usually sells in the neighborhood of $50 up to $150. This is Patsy Cline's first album from 1957. This is back when she was on 4-Star Records, which leased all of its music to Decca. So even though, her earlier career was on a different record label, all the records say Decca because that's what it's leased to. So I was, blown away to find this record and to be gifted it. And, she paid $45 for this, which is, a really good deal. Well, lo and behold, never thought I'd see another one, but sure enough, I came across this guy. Or gal. Guy. It sounds weird to say guy. It's clearly a gal. Came across this one. And this is a slight variant. You may be saying, well, it's the same record. What? It's literally the same record. It's not. So let's take a minute. Let's peruse the cover. And we're going to talk about a couple of different things here. So, they're both the same album, obviously. They're both DL8611. So that doesn't give us any hint in this regard. They both have the same Decca records. High fidelity at the top. These were mono. She didn't start doing stereo until, about 1960 with her second album, which we'll look at in a minute. So the first thing that you'll notice, actually really the only thing that you'll notice in terms of the difference, this one is better condition than this. This is a later pressing. How do I know that that's a later pressing? Yes, the album came out in 57. This pressing is from 1960. This is 60 as well, I believe, but it's a different 1960 pressing. It might be an international version, and I'll show you in a minute why I think that. But the big thing is it says, including Walkin' After Midnight, which was the hit song off this album. Well, right there, because it says, including the hit, blah, 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 we know that this is a later pressing. This cannot be the original version. And as it turns out, this isn't either. But if you were to have the original version, it also would be blank right there. Because obviously they don't know what the hit record is going to be, what the hit song is going to be off that album. So the fact that we know what song was a hit off that album tells us that the album's already been out. And that is, a big clue. So keep an eye out for featuring the hit song, blah, 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 blah. And there you go. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. And then on the back, this one has the record is on the outside of the sleeve, but they look identical on the back. I was just going to show you that they are the same. Okay, so that's something. We want to look at the marketing material. We want to understand, what's different about each version. So let's go on here now and look at another duplicate that I have. All right, so first things first, we notice that this is a lot cleaner looking. It looks more new just because of that. The art is the same. We've got Decca. This is placed a little bit different over here, so that's a variant. You can see that it's just laid out a little lower over here, but it's very similar. But what we're looking for here is two released versions of the same album. This is the stereo version, and this says nothing, which means it's the mono version. And really quickly, I just want to recap. We've talked about this before, but in the early days of stereo records, I'm talking like, late 50s, like 58 to like 64, 65, the best engineers at a record label were assigned to master the mono versions because they were considered the primary seller. These are the records that would go to radio stations. These are the mixes that people would hear and then want to buy the record. So there was completely different mastering oftentimes with the mono versus the stereo, giving you two completely different things to listen to. Not completely different. It's the same songs, right? But it's going to sound different. There's going to be different nuances. The mix is going to be different. So some collectors know that, and they, hunt these mono editions down. Now, they don't say mono usually. They just don't say stereo. That's the variation. I attribute the wear and aging mostly just to, how this was stored. It's probably out in the sun more than that one was, because these records are both Decca editions. That is DL 74586. Now, for Decca, when you see the 7 at the beginning of the number, in fact, I'm going to show you up close. 74586, that indicates that it is stereo. Just by the number, you can, tell at a quick glance, whereas the mono is DL4586. It doesn't have that 7. And while we're on the topic of identifying things, what's this whole, you guys maybe already know about, that's a knockout, that's a punch out. So that means that this particular record was unsold in the store and was basically written off as a loss for the record label and sold so that the record store profited, but the artist, the estate, didn't make any money on these. So they always did the punch outs, in the part of the label where it isn't going to hurt the record because the record's up here. But you just know by looking at those knockouts or punch out editions that this one the artist didn't get any money, or the estate didn't get any money. So there you go. So mono versus stereo, it's kind of interesting. Let's look a little bit further in on this as well. We are going to look at two copies of the same record again. So this is the 1967 release of Patsy Cline's Greatest Hits. So we're just going to do a little quiz action here and see if you can identify. There's a lot of variance on these two copies, so this is good. This helps us out a lot. So what do we see? We see that the background color on this is green, and this one's kind of this weird. I don't even know what color this is. It's kind of a darker green, kind of some blue mixed in, but it's clearly a different color. The artwork on this, in terms of the lettering and the photograph, are sharper. This is a little bit blurrier. So we clearly have two different versions. So we know one is stereo. This one doesn't say stereo, so perhaps it's mono. I'm not 100% sure. But what else do you notice that's different? Okay, do you see anything else? Decca versus MCA. So this one is probably newer. So this one's probably older, right? Well, actually not. In this case, this is the older version. This is the newer version. How can this be? You're getting confusing, Record-ology. So this is MCA. So we know this is 72 up until about 90-something before MCA became Universal Music Group and all of the masters burned to the ground. I'm not going to get bitter. I'm not bitter about that, but the masters to all of this stuff is gone, up in smoke, completely lost, as with most artists. Except, ironically, for the album reel of the original version of this, which was in Nashville at the time. That's the only surviving. It's not even really a master, because the real masters were half-inch, 3-track tapes. Those are all burned to a crisp. But the stereo quarter-inch album reel for the Greatest Hits 1967 release survives because of that. I'm not going to go down that road again. We've done that before. But the MCA version, so we know this is between 72 and like 90s. This is actually about 85. But this one says Decca, so it should be older, right? Well, it's not. This is actually the 2016 release. So this is up in the Universal UMG era of the record label, but they have the right and ownership to use the branding for Decca, so they did just that. I love that they've used the vintage cover on the back, which is completely different than the MCA edition. This is much more like, in terms of what's on the back here, that you would have seen on the original 1967 version. Okay, so this one, I'm not going to call this a quiz because this starts to get tricky. We're kind of back into learning mode here. So this is another rare album. This is Patsy Cline's Showcase featuring the Jordanaires. And this record is pretty rare. This is another $100 to $110 record in this iteration. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So I wanted to show you that one of the easiest ways to differentiate which version you have is by the cover art. Because in this case, Patsy Cline's Showcase is way more known with this cover art, which is the one that was the re-release that was re-released after her passing. So the original one during her lifetime was this version, and then the one that, you know, was released after that in much greater quantity was this one. So this is the one you're going to see, and this is actually the one that I was able to start the whole journey down this road on, because I found this in a free bin. I think I found this in a Second & Charles free bin. And I had no interest in listening to it at the time. I just cleaned it, stored it, and filed it away. And then one day I just like, hey, let's listen to this. And then the rest is history. So that's the easiest version, or easiest way to do it. So if you have, an idea of what versions exist, these two iterations, and you say, you know what, I want to find the original album art version that's out there. Comes to mind too is the Beatles' White Album, which, looks like this. But if you dig, you can find the version that looks like this, which is legendary and fun to find, the rarities, okay? So let's step forward again and look at a new edition. This one came out, I think, 2017. And as you can tell, we got the same artwork. Do we? Do we have the same artwork? Could we tell these two apart? Let's put on our CSI glasses. Okay, they're both red, but this one's a little bit different shade. They both say stereo. They both say Showcase with the Jordanaires. Jordanaires, by the way, were the same vocal group that sung backup to Elvis. They were the first Elvis backup group. We see the including list down there. And, wait a minute. Decca over there. No Decca here. Wait a minute. What label is this? It doesn't say MCA. It doesn't say Decca. It doesn't say Universal Music Group. Let's look at the back here. This is clearly different. That's because this isn't really Patsy Cline Showcase. This is sort of a counterfeit, if you will. Let's take a closer look at the counterfeit. So it's very colorful. It looks really cool. We even give some props to the original cover, the rare, first iteration. We've got liner notes with accurate information. One thing that you'll notice here is the original back. We have 6 songs on side 1, 6 side on song 2. Well, that's interesting. The Jordanaires appear courtesy of Capitol. I didn't realize that. So 6 songs and 6 songs, and here we've got, 7 songs and 7 songs? What in the heck? Bonus tracks? This is definitely a hipster thing, right? Because we've got, what's a bonus track? The people of 63 don't know what a bonus track is, but we know what a bonus track is. We want extra. Oh, I got the one with the bonus tracks. So as it turns out, this uses older versions of the songs, a pretty inferior sound quality, and it is DMM, which is good. That means they can cram more music. That's how they could fit, 7 songs versus 6, because a DMM pressing is, the master is cut into a metal disc, so there's less. They can cram the tracks closer together is what it comes down to. The appeal here, besides the bonus songs, is really the fact that it's pressed in a beautiful red color, which we'll look at in a minute. But yeah, this is a European Union, as you can say, made in the EU, 2020. Okay. Copyright in the EU for music is a little bit gray area compared to, that's not a sentence. Copyright in the EU is a bit of a gray area compared to here in the United States. So a lot of records come out of there, even remakes of classic albums, or so it would seem with this. So it's an interesting thing. Oftentimes they're not licensed, they're not paying royalties. So if that's important to you, that's something to be aware of. They do make interesting collector pieces. They do. Okay, we've really learned about everything you can learn from the cover, but we really need to look at the records now, because there's more CSI work, more knowledge to be gained on the record label. So let's look at that. Showing records on camera with these phone cameras is a really good way to notice the lens distortion, because they look kind of like oblong rather than round. Anyway, so these are those 2 records we were just looking at. More so just because it's really cool to see this cherry red record. It's beautiful. It's a nice thick, I think it's 180 gram pressing. You can, on a good sound system, you can tell that the source audio for here was probably a CD. You know what I mean? Unlicensed, compact disc sources. Whereas obviously this is going to be, you know, one of the Owen Bradley master tapes. And Owen Bradley was a producer's producer. His music is just absolutely lush. You can literally hear a difference, the warmth, the saturation, the tonal qualities of a well-made record versus, you know, a more modern digital sound. It's just the way it is. It's what I've learned. And even on my video talking about, you know, CDs are better than vinyl, I acknowledge the fact that, you know, they can sound better, but even though they're not technically, you know, from a scientific standpoint, higher quality, they can sound better. These two labels are completely diametrically opposed. They don't look anything like each other, so that's not really going to tell us much. However, if we look at the oldest version, the original artwork version of Showcase versus this version, we can learn something. So let's see what we can find out. If you've been collecting records for some time, you'll start to develop a sense for the higher quality pressings, the higher quality labels in general. Decca, to me, is one of the highest quality ones. It's akin in terms of thickness and feel and weight to a mid-60s black label RCA Victor. Okay, so we've got, you know, the first, you know, the main two variants. I got the new knockoff version is out of the way now. We're looking at the two originals. Again, the original version on the left and the more prevalent but still authentically original one on the right. Now, the one on the left is also a mono edition. This is stereo. We talked about how you can tell by the outside cover, but you can actually tell that information with the right bit of knowledge from looking at the label on the record itself. So for Decca, it's pretty easy. We're going to look up close here. So this is very typical of a post-1960s Decca. This is called a rainbow label. They use this label from 1960 up until they were MCA in 1972. I think it's 72. It's either 72 or 73. So, and we're going to look at an older version of the Decca label. So we know it's post-1960 just by that label alone. However, at the top, you'll see it says long play 33 1/3. Why is that important? By the way, if you see this sort of like wear marking on the label there, that's called rub wear. That's just from it sliding in and out of the cover for so many times. So remember that 33 1/3 at the top. However, the stereo record, as you can tell, we look at the top, it says stereophonic. So that's a quick and easy way for the Decca folks to let us know that this is a stereo pressing and that's a mono pressing. And again, we talked about why that matters. Now, sometimes people these days may not realize the heritage hallmarks of the brands that they own. Such is the case with, to a degree, I hope they're not watching this, Universal Music Group. Because we talked about this 2016 edition of the 1967 Greatest Hits album. Let's go ahead and take it out. And we're going to look at it right here. So they've yellowed the label a little bit, kind of got it a vintage look. You can notice the originals there, the white part around Decca is whiter. This is sort of an off-white. But what really cracks me up, actually you guys noticed this before I did when I first showed this record. But you'll see the cover clearly says stereo, and that says long play 33 1/3, which violates the tradition of Decca records saying 33 1/3 for mono or stereophonic for stereo. So what the heck is going on there? Now what we need to do is take a closer look at this area right here. This is called the dead wax. So dead wax refers to everything after the last song. This run out groove area, this is considered dead wax. More specifically, the space in between the run out grooves. Basically the part that the needle will never touch. The record labels and the mastering engineers use this space to communicate information to this. So right here, every record is going to have what's called a matrix number, and this is different than the number stamped on the outside of the record, although sometimes you'll find that as well, but you are going to find this matrix number. This right here ties this pressing to a specific stamper, and as you remember, records are stamped from metal parts.
It has taken many steps and many man-hours to get here.
And, you know, that master is a direct replicate of, you know, the master recording, the lacquer, the acetate, whatever the original version is for this record run, and they can vary. That means this one is MG, as you can see, that means Decca 578, or is that 68T6. That is very informative, and I'll show you why in a minute. If we look at the other version of this record, this is the 1957 album, by the way, and we're going to search this dead wax for the number, and as you can see, this one is different. This is MG5789T4. That means that these two records, they're both mono. They're both very closely related. There was a slight difference in the cover art, as we saw. We know they're two different runs, and this confirms it because the matrix number on this does not match that. That alone doesn't necessarily mean this is going to sound any different. They could be mastered, and they are, off of the same source tape. But the adjustments that the engineer applies to that pressing, the way the grooves are modulated, can differ. And as you can see, I'm actually just noticing this for the first time right now. Look how wide the dead wax is here compared to that one. Isn't that interesting? Same song list, same tracks, same recordings, but clearly this record is using less real estate than that one. That's really, really interesting. So the grooves are probably spaced wider over here. That may sound differently than this one. That may sound differently. So the engineer for this run, for this pressing, made decisions that this one didn't, or vice versa. They're just different. So what do you do with that matrix number? Well, let me tell you about, and now's when the old timers are, leaning back in their chairs and, throwing popcorn in their mouth because they're going to see if this kid can get it right. So Discogs.com is a kind of a database of information for vinyl record collectors. And the website, you can buy records, you can sell records, but what I use it for is actually to research records because you can go and look at all different versions. So let's look at this album. Let's type in the record number itself. This is going to be Decca DL8611. And as you can see, there are many, many different versions, including versions under different label releases and even some with different cover art and all that crazy stuff. But if I click into a specific version, a specific iteration, I can find out what year it was released. I can find out a lot of information about the record. And if we look up the pressing on the left, that is going to be MG5789T4. We can pin down which specific release it was, what year it came out, 1960. Well, it turns out that that number correlates to a New Zealand pressing, which this says printed in the US. So a bit of a mystery there. Discogs is sort of an open database, kind of like Wikipedia, so it's possible there's misinformation. Tell me if you guys have found misinformation on that site before. But kind of interesting, right? It's a really helpful tool in the CSI journey. All right, one more thing to look at, you guys, and that is label variants. Don't forget what I said. I got a little inside knowledge for you at the end of the show. So stay tuned. We're almost to the end, and I will share that with you. This is my beautiful 2020 Record Store Day edition Crosley Beatles. Is this a Voyager? It's either a Voyager or Portfolio. It's got this mechanism, which is great, magnetic cartridge, wonderful portable. It was a limited edition run, either 1,000 or 1,500. I'm very blessed to have one. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about, specifically in the case of Decca records, are the label variants. So we looked at the Rainbow label, that was 1960 onwards, but prior to that on LP, now they go back obviously, into 78 era and stuff, so we're not kind of covering that, but if you were looking like late 50s, the original versions of some of these albums would have a label that looked like this. And that's really the desirable label that you want to find when collecting these records. But everyone, and by the way, the album we're looking at now is going to be this. I don't have a duplicate of this. This is the Sentimental Years. This is the third album and the last one released during her lifetime. It is a great album. It is, fantastic. Absolutely. I love how they advertise the other albums that were available at the time. But what's so spectacular about this one is this guy right here. So you may be saying, wow, you got it. That is one of those old labels from Decca. It is, but it's even more special than that because it's pink. If you find a pink Decca record label, get it. Because it is a record that was designed and sent to radio stations. These are radio station exclusive editions. And I think that that's a very, very cool thing. So keep an eye out for that. I love this. This is interesting because this was released in, I think, 63. Is it late 62 or 63? So Decca would have been off of this label, the black version of this by now, but they were using it apparently for the record, for the releases, for the radio station editions, plus tax, I'm trying to say. So that's kind of interesting, right? That's kind of a bizarre thing. They're not super rare because if you go on eBay and just type in like Patsy Cline records, you will find, every once in a while you'll find a pink one, usually a 45. Somebody on eBay recently had the original 1957 album, this guy right here, on, I keep saying this guy right here, on with that label. And that was, before I could even go back, I bookmarked it, and before I could even go back and look, it was gone. They were selling it for like $40. That would have been a killer deal. But let's go ahead and listen. I say but a lot. I'm sorry about that. Let's go ahead and listen to this. This will be the grand finale of the show today, guys. Thanks for hanging in there. But now you know some tips and tricks on how to do a little CSI work. And there's much more, by the way, in the dead wax besides just the matrix number, because the engineers either put codes or symbols or things to sort of sign their work, because collectors will also be on the lookout for certain versions or certain mastered editions because of the engineer that worked on it, which is really cool. So obviously I can't play much of this music because of copyright, but I just want to say thank you guys for being there with me, and I hope you enjoyed this show. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video, and you are going to be rewarded with the little insider baseball that I was teasing you about earlier. So a little birdie tells me that if you like the Beatles and you like the idea of exclusive record players featuring the Beatles, you're in for a treat very soon. And that's about all I can say right now, but I am privy to some very interesting information that I'm excited to share with you. And you better believe we're going to bring it to you guys first. But stay tuned if that's something that interests you guys. Thank you so much. All right, my friends, and that is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for being here. If you want more content than you are currently getting from Record-ology, consider joining our membership program called the Record-ology Vinyl Nation. Link in the description below. You will get an extra show a week and other cool benefits. Also, do you guys happen to own any Record-ology merch yet? Why not check it out? There's a banner list down below you can check out as well. But that's going to do it for now, guys. Happy record hunting. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.